Thank you all for coming out today. I know you are really riled up about recent events relating to genetically modified organisms in our food. As you may be aware, the Obama administration has just approved 3 new genetically modified crops for our food supply. Now we have genetically modified sugar beets, we've got genetically modified alfalfa, we've got a genetically modified corn that is designed to convert easily into ethanol, but cannot be easily made into food and could easily contaminate our food supply. And the Obama administration might be the first to approve a genetically engineered animal, the fast-growing aqua bounty salmon. So I think that's probably what brought you all here today. Here I'm with Bill Aal of AgriWatch, and this discussion is going to be about the geopolitics of Monsanto's power in the world and our power as organic consumers to support an alternative vision for how to increase food production and feed the world into the future. After our presentation, Jeffrey Smith is doing an event at the main stage, and this is very exciting. He is an expert on the health implications of genetically modified foods in our diet. So we're not going to cover that topic right now. One of the exciting parts of that program is going to be that afterwards he's convening an activist summit where we can all talk about how to take down Monsanto and how to get organized in Washington State and Seattle and where all y'all are from. So this is a great program that the Green Festival has provided us, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today. So Bill is a fantastic expert on the Gates Foundation's connections to Monsanto. So I'm just going to let Bill start by telling us what AgriWatch is, what the Gates Foundation is, and what Monsanto is, and how these things connect.
Attention everyone, Monsanto is trying to take over the world. And it's really true in so many ways. Monsanto and some of the other big pharma and big agricultural seed companies are really seeing that what's important to make money and to control the world's food supply is to get control over the seed, over the genetic information in the seed that's coming from traditional farming farms all across the world. AgriWatch is a part of an organization in Seattle called the Community Alliance for Global Justice, and we got started out of the WTO festivities in 1999 as a way to start to organize across the different issues in our community and internationally that it has a broad perspective. So about 3 years ago, we were invited to a meeting with a farmer who's from Kenya who's named Joseph Mashinga, and somebody from the Gates Foundation to talk about the future of agriculture in Africa. And by the time we were through with that conversation, we were horrified. Joseph Mashinga was talking about having learned a kind of agriculture, actually that comes from the Northwest, but was brought into the African context and made African by a group called Manor House in Kenya. And they've trained 37, now 50,000 farmers in biointensive agriculture that keeps farmers in their community using on-farm inputs and basically sustainable and organic techniques. And with very little money, this technique was taught to lots of farmers, and it's working. The Gates Foundation guys said, "Whoa, that's really interesting because we don't think that organic works on the continent, that the soils are too poor, that the environmental conditions and so on are not really up for that." They've changed their tune a little bit if you look at some of their propaganda, but basically they think that high industrial agriculture with lots of money, fertilizer, hybrid seeds, and genetically modified seeds are the way to feed Africa and to consolidate farms. They talk about land mobility. What's land mobility, you think? No, it's not kind of farming. It is privatizing land so people can sell the farm if they need to, so they can actually mortgage their farm so they can be a part of these loan packages that are being pushed by the Gates Foundation and USAID and other international aid organizations. And so the idea is that you can borrow against it, and if you can't pay for it, you don't have any other resources, so the farm goes back to the bank effectively. That's one thing. The second thing is that they believe that farms need to be large in order to feed people. It needs to be efficient by having larger and larger farms, just like in the United States is the model. But in Africa, 76% of the food is produced mainly by women, but by small farm holders. So the idea that the Gates Foundation has is like, in order to feed the future, which is another term you'll hear later on, we need to consolidate farms and have people move to the city where they're going to make their fortune in cities like Nairobi, which is a huge mega city, and so on. So we were really horrified, and we started working with folks in Seattle and then in Kenya and in Zimbabwe and Zambia and some other countries in Africa to start to look at what their thinking was about how they should feed themselves. And we started to interact with groups like Food First and other international and national organizations to see what solutions we could come up with collectively to suggest to the Gates Foundation and to promote to the American public that there are other ways to feed Africa besides creating industrial farms. So we've been working at it for about 3 years, as I said, and in those 3 years we discovered some interesting things. The first thing is this project called AGRA, which is the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, funded by the Gates and the Rockefeller Foundation, was founded to bring the Green Revolution. Do people remember that term? Who heard the term Green Revolution before? Okay, so a lot of you already know both the successes and the failures of the Green Revolution in the Philippines, in India, other parts of Asia and Latin America. It was tried in Africa and failed miserably because they didn't understand the continent. So this new Green Revolution, 30 years later, 40 years later, was meant to correct those problems. So the Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, which was involved in the first Green Revolution, said, aha, we've got the answers, and we're going to work in 13 countries to promote industrial agriculture and integration into the world markets and so on. But we're not going to do GMOs because mainly in Africa, with the exception of South Africa at the time and a few other countries now, GMOs are not part of the mix, and there's actually a lot of resistance on the part of governments and people against GMOs. But the Gates Foundation didn't stop with funding AGRA, which is promoting these more conventional methods. They put another $900 million into research. A lot of it's for GMOs, and a lot of it is to promote weak biosafety regulations in the continent. Weak biosafety regulations. Well, biosafety seems like a good thing, huh? Well, what it's really about is creating the regulatory environment by which GMOs can be brought into a country, supposedly safely. The particular ways that Gates was doing that is to fund the J. Danforth Foundation to do this. Now, if anybody knows who the Danforth Foundation is, they are funded by Monsanto. They're in St. Louis. They're the sort of the house foundation for Monsanto, if you will. So on the one hand, they're putting money into this AGRA project, and on the other hand, they're putting lots of money into GMO research. So what we started to realize was that while AGRA was funding a lot of projects, in particular in Kenya, 86% of those projects were also being funded by Monsanto. And we started to see that there was a direct relationship between the way that Gates was working and the way that Monsanto was working. That's why we're so excited at this project that you guys are doing. We further started to note that high level of officers that are in the Gates Foundation used to work at Monsanto. There's a revolving door between Monsanto, the Gates Foundation, and USAID, and so on, so that the old pattern of we'll get what we want by impacting policy in all these different ways is happening again. So it's not a new method. A lot of organizations or foundations and corporations have used this as a way to influence policy before. But we started to put out information about that and got a lot of response from around the world that they wanted to try to stop the Gates Foundation too. The other thing that the Gates Foundation and Monsanto, the other thing that the Gates Foundation did was it invested $23 million in Monsanto in the last year, and we started to put that out in the global press with other organizations, and people were horrified at that as well because of this continuing direct linkage between the Gates Foundation and Monsanto and other biotech companies. So just to cap it off at this point, we've been working with grassroots organizations in Africa who are promoting agroecological, what we wouldn't call alternatives, but are called alternatives. ways to use organic and sustainable methods that come from a blend of traditional and more modern techniques for having food grown by local farmers, again, mainly women, and that will support the earth and the people there. So we're promoting agroecological alternatives and working with others to stop the Gates Foundation from promoting these kinds of techniques and to maybe start to shift some of their money towards sustainable. We're not even asking them to do that. We think that's their job to figure out what to do. But we know that around the world, people are in resistance to the kinds of practices that Monsanto has, and then also that Gates has around that. So.
Bill mentioned that one of the connections, not only this investment connection between the Gates Foundation and Monsanto, is a personal connection. The same people who worked for Monsanto's research firm, the Danforth Plant Science Institute, got jobs at the Gates Foundation working on agriculture policy. Now, those people are working for the Obama administration. The first person who comes to mind is Rajiv Shah. He is in charge of USAID, and this is the philanthropic arm of the U.S. government. But their mission, it's couched as a humanitarian mission, but their mission is to help companies like Monsanto break into poor countries that want to resist Monsanto seed. An excellent example is Haiti. After the horrible earthquake in Haiti, you would think the people there were so desperate they would take any type of help. Monsanto and USAID, led by Rajiv Shah, who worked at the Gates Foundation, they said, we've got a wonderful gift for you. We're going to donate hundreds of tons of seed to you. And the Haiti government said, is it genetically modified? And they said, yeah, we want to give you genetically modified seed. They said, no way, we're not taking your genetically modified seed. They did end up accepting some seed, hybridized seed, that had a fungicide on it, and the government ended up accepting that. But the farmers resisted. The farmers didn't even want Monsanto's hybrid fungicide seed. They didn't want any Monsanto seed because they know what happens when rich countries dump agricultural resources on poor countries. For one thing, they put the indigenous farmers out of business. This donation of seed is going to be sold in the market, so it's not that it's just dumped for free. And the only alternative that way, it's going to be sold but at a reduced price. And it's going to push the indigenous seed suppliers out of business there. And it's going to discourage people from saving their seed and producing seed in their own country. Now, this is the very story of Haiti. Not necessarily related to genetic modification, but Haiti used to be a food self-sufficient country. They got a whole lot of American rice dumped on their market, and pretty soon the indigenous farmers were put out of business, and they are reliant now on food imports from the United States. So these food aid, it can be used in a very destructive way, and even when it's not connected to genetically modified food. So that's just one example of somebody who's connected to Monsanto and the Gates Foundation working in the Obama administration. And there are many more examples, but we should probably cover other topics. Are you all ready to participate?
Okay, I'm from America too. I mean, I just don't know what you're doing to fight this and what we can all do. So I'm not familiar with your organizations. I'd like to hear more about that.
So I'm with the Millions Against Monsanto campaign of the Organic Consumers Association, and our main demand right now is to give consumers the ability to choose whether or not to support companies like Monsanto that are forcing their genetically modified crops on us in the U.S. food supply and on the world. And the trouble is, if you decide you want to boycott Monsanto and you go into the grocery store, there's no way of telling what products contain Monsanto's ingredients. If you memorize a list of genetically modified crops, I guess you can spend all day reading the label in the grocery store, but most people aren't going to do that. Only about a quarter of the U.S. population is actually aware that genetically modified foods are in our food supply. So until we have labeling, we're not going to have a level of awareness that could result in a mass boycott of Monsanto's crops. And actually, we really need to get the companies to phase out Monsanto's ingredients, but that's not going to happen until consumers are aware that they're there in the first place. So our labeling our demand is for genetically modified foods to be labeled. And that's the first step in the Millions Against Monsanto campaign.
So,
Yeah, and it's been going on a while. It's true. But we're back. You know, the awareness of this issue ebbs and flows. We have a wonderful opportunity right now. So many more people are aware because of the recent bad actions of the Obama administration approving new genetically engineered crops, considering the first genetically engineered animal. We have this opportunity. We have a packed house in our little community action pavilion. And I know that a lot of you all came from far and wide to come be part of this movement. So I think we've got energy, we've got awareness, and we have an opportunity here. It's true that the bills in Congress to label genetically modified foods have received very little attention. Dennis Kucinich has valiantly worked on this issue for years and years, since about 1999, introducing bills to label genetically modified foods. The most co-sponsors these bills have ever gotten out of 435 members of Congress is about 50. And I just heard from one of your friends here in the area that Congressman Jim McDermott doesn't know anything about this issue. He thinks wheat is genetically modified and that it's a good thing. He probably confuses conventional breeding with genetic modification. So Congresspeople and legislators are uninformed, just like most Americans, and they don't know that it's a problem. So yes, we have not been successful so far.
Alexis, how many people in the American public, if they knew it was labeled, would reject GMO food?
90%.
Those are from lots of different polls that have been conducted over the last several years, last 20 years. And it's true that Monsanto and the other companies keep pushing back around labeling. Back in the 90s, there was a struggle in Vermont, and I actually helped to make a movie called Risky Business, which was about agricultural biotech back then. It's still a really useful movie to see. And we went to Vermont, and what we noticed was this very independent state legislature. You know, Vermont's the kind of the show me state. That's not their motto, but it's close enough. They did pass a labeling law for dairy products in particular to stop BGH, which is the first genetically modified food. And it was a full court press by Monsanto's lobbyists, and I won't go through the whole story, but they've been trying to fight it. They fought it in this state when we introduced labeling stuff back in the same period of time. So they're really afraid of labeling.
I was just wondering if there's a legal defense fund formed for people whose crops were infected and contaminated by nearby genetically modified growing operations, so that they can sue them.
I think it's a great project, especially for this region. Now that sugar beets have been approved by the Obama administration, farmers will inevitably be contaminated, and it's very important to support them. There are farmers in the Northeast that are becoming proactive. They've filed a lawsuit that would respect their right to be free of contamination, and I think so far all of the lawsuits have been Monsanto against the farmers. Now this is a lawsuit, the farmers against Monsanto, and it's an open legal question. I think the farmers have a really, really good chance in this fight to prove that they should be free of the contamination from Monsanto's GMOs. Let's get some more questions. Please come up.
So while he's coming up, Alexis, the other thing is, in this state, GMO alfalfa is a real issue because one of our biggest, it's a small crop but a very important crop that goes to Japan, organic alfalfa more precisely. And alfalfa is a very promiscuous seed, and it will spread really rapidly. And so the farmers, conventional and organic, are really concerned about having GMO alfalfa. So the conventional farmers as well are beginning to think about lawsuits in this state.
What situations would you think GMO would actually be a positive thing?
Want to go first?
That's a great question. What would it be a genetically modified crop that we'd all like? Monsanto is currently trying to zero. Yeah, that might be the answer. But let's take this seriously. Let's take this seriously and think, outside the box and try to figure out what kind of genetically modified crop would be desirable. Monsanto is currently marketing and trying to get approved a drought-tolerant corn. And that's what they've been saying they're working on all the time, right? Of course, all their other genetically modified crops are just designed to sell their herbicide, Roundup. They're genetically modified to resist the herbicide so that farmers can spray unlimited amounts of herbicide on their crops. So Monsanto is a chemical company. They sell chemicals, and that's the purpose. But they have this so-called drought-tolerant corn now. The USDA currently released just this month an environmental impact statement on Monsanto's new corn, and they found that it actually did not, any more than any normal conventional crop, resist drought. So, they've been doing at least a decade of research on how to make a crop that actually benefits humanity, and it's a failure. This is the best they've got, and it doesn't work. And they're trying to get it approved, and the USDA said, well, it's not any better than conventional corn, but we don't see why it shouldn't be approved. So now's the time to write letters to your congressman, to the Obama administration, about approving failure. Why should we approve Monsanto's idea of a drought-resistant crop when it doesn't work?
In the context of Africa, they've been promoting both drought-resistant maize and drought-resistant rice. What's interesting is there's at least 10 or 15 varieties of drought-resistant rice that already exist on the continent, and also of maize that have come from conventional breeding techniques. And so the idea that we need genetically modified organisms to get these traits just right is not accurate. There's so many flaws with the technology. If you go to the Consumers Union, the Union of Concerned Scientists, there's lots of research that shows the actual instability of the genetic material that goes into plants when you cross the species barrier. I can talk to people more about that, but what it means is, for example, there was a GMO cassava that was being brought to the continent of Africa. They took 7 years to do the research on it. They got it approved, and the gene trait disappeared from the cassava and they couldn't figure out why. We have some speculation about how that works, but they had to withdraw the GMO cassava because it's just became too unstable. Support local agriculture and support your co-ops. All up and down the Puget Sound, the co-ops are providing the information. They have Jeffrey Smith's books up in Mount Vernon Co-op in a nice dump. It's really been quite sweet to see, and that's a real source of information, also supporting your local economy.
My question was, what research has been done on GMOs and the effect that it has on human health?
I'll just give you a short summary, and I really encourage you to go see Jeffrey Smith speak right after this in the main stage at 5 o'clock. But the main things are allergies, cancer, and a lack of nutrition in our food. And one of the interesting things in the context of feeding the world is that the crops that have been genetically modified to withstand herbicides, the way that this works is that the herbicide would kill the plant by depriving it of nutrients. It blocks the plant's ability to take nutrients from the soil, and when the plant doesn't get nutrients, it dies. Monsanto found a bacteria that could withstand its herbicide Roundup. It did not allow the plant to take the nutrients up. It just enabled the plant to withstand the diseases it would succumb to if it lacked nutrients. So we've got this sort of undead plant. It can't take in nutrients, but it's still not going to die. And that's what we're eating. We're eating a plant that doesn't have nutrients but still didn't die. Now, what does that make us? We're like people walking around that are managing to live without having enough nutrition in our bodies. Does that have anything to do with the fact that most Americans are fat and sick? Are we eating all this food that has lots of calories but no nutrition? This is obviously going to have serious health impacts. But that's all I'll say. Let's leave it for Jeffrey to expand upon that.
And here's a book, Alexis. So this is one of Jeffrey's books, Genetic Roulette, that has a lot of documentation around the health impacts. But in addition, I'm just going to say, in addition to health impacts, there's environmental impacts, and there's the question of how farmers can continue to make a living independently. There's so many other issues that it's not just about health that we need to look at, and the impact on all the environment and the economics of farming, as well as the health of our people, is at stake.
One of the problems that I'm aware of with GMO and things like the Gates Foundation and all that, what about like the senators in the House of Congress and all them? They have people all around different major companies that, well, they can't really control, and they have a vote, and so they can just vote for whatever Monsanto wants, and then once their little shift is over, they can just go back to their Monsanto jobs, and it's just kind of an unbeatable thing, but I want to know how you can beat it.
I'm going to take the opportunity to say that that's a really tough question. And a lot of us have been trying to work on it for a while. And as you were saying, there's the movement around GMOs has fluctuated over the last 20 years or so, 30 years even. And now it's come back with a vengeance, partially because of what you're saying and partially because people are becoming more aware. And in Washington State, I was talking to the League of Women Voters in Sequim, which is over on the Olympic Peninsula, and they want to start a county campaign to make a GMO-free county in Sequim, Washington, which is a very conservative part. So there's a lot of citizens that are beginning to speak together, and that's what we got to start doing. And one of the reasons why we're excited to have Jeffrey and OCA in town is that we can start to talk about a multi-organization and a multi-community effort across the state to fight against GMOs. I've been doing this for a long time. In the 90s, we fought against GMO wheat in eastern Washington with the farmers in the far west, and we were able to defeat GMO wheat because the impact of on the economics. We sell so much of our wheat to Japan and the Philippines, and they still don't want GMOs. And so the farmers here are saying we don't want it either, because if there's any GMO wheat in the country, anywhere, the Japanese wouldn't buy it, even from the far west. So that's one strategy, is to get the farmers together. And what you're talking about is an electoral strategy that we're going to have to work on together for a long time. So thanks.
My question is, when we get to the point, if we get to the point where there's enough public awareness, where enough people are making enough noise, which I have great hope and faith that will happen, how can we phase it out if there's like 98% of the soy in the U.S. is genetically modified, and 90% of corn, I believe? How can we turn the tide and phase that out if there's so much in the environment?
Boycott Monsanto.